This man built the greatest invention of the 19th century and then did absolutely nothing with it. No ads, no demos, no sales. He just let it rot in a shed because he was terrified of looking stupid. So his wife took matters and the keys into her own hands. What she did next was technically illegal and completely changed the world. That man was Karl Benz. And yeah, you know the name. It's slapped on the back of like half the luxury cars flexing in traffic right now. But here's the part nobody tells you. The guy who invented the car was the single worst salesman in human history. He built the future in his workshop, looked at it, panicked, and basically hid it under a blanket. So today, we're not talking about some triumphant genius rolling his masterpiece into the sunlight while a crowd cheers. We're talking about a nervous perfectionist, a garage full of doubt, and one absolutely unhinged wife who decided she was done waiting. Let's rewind to Germany in the 1880s. Picture the roads. Actually, don't, because there weren't any. Not for cars. There were dirt paths, cobblestones, and horses. So many horses. The entire planet ran on horse. If you wanted to go somewhere, you fed a large animal, hitched it to a cart, and hoped it was in a good mood. That was transportation. That was the peak of human innovation for literally thousands of years, and horses were a nightmare. They got tired. They got sick. They needed feeding, watering, brushing, and an entire crew just to keep them functioning. They pooped everywhere. Cities were literally drowning in mountains of horse manure, and nobody could figure out what to do about it. That was the vibe. That was daily life. Humanity had been hard stuck at donkey-level technology since basically the dawn of time, and everyone just shrugged and accepted it. And Karl Benz looked at all of that and thought, nah, I can do better than a horse. Bold. Because at the time, this was basically science fiction. A carriage that moves by itself, with no animal pulling it? People genuinely thought you were either a wizard or an idiot. There was no in between. But Karl was obsessed. This dude was a mechanical engineer, and he had one dream burned into his skull. A self-propelled vehicle powered by an internal combustion engine. In plain English, a cart that runs on controlled explosions instead of a sad, tired donkey. Now here's where it gets spicy, and where you learn the name that actually deserves the statue. Because Karl had a huge problem. He was broke. Building a revolutionary machine costs money, and inventors back then didn't exactly have investors sliding into their DMs. His little company was drowning. The dream was about to die in a pile of unpaid bills. Enter Bertha. Bertha Benz was Karl's wife, and she believed in this car when literally nobody else on earth did, including, at times, Karl himself. And she didn't just cheer from the sidelines. She put her actual money where her mouth was. Bertha used her own dowry, her personal fortune, to fund the business. She invested in the company before they were even married. Let that sink in. The first car in history was bankrolled by a woman betting her entire savings on a machine everyone said was impossible. So technically, the car was as much hers as it was his. Remember that. It matters later. So Karl, funded by his ride-or-die wife, gets to work. And in 1886, he does it. He files a patent for the Benz Patent-Motorwagen. This thing is the real deal. The first automobile designed from the ground up to be powered by an engine. Not a horse cart with a motor bolted on. A purpose-built machine. Let's talk about this glorious beast, because by today's standards, it's hilarious. It had 3 wheels. 3. 1 in the front to steer, 2 in the back. It looked like a fancy tricycle for a very confused adult. You didn't steer it with a wheel. You steered it with a little lever, a tiller, like you were captaining the world's slowest boat. The engine? A single-cylinder, 4-stroke gasoline engine cranking out a jaw-dropping 2/3 of 1 horsepower. Later versions squeezed out around 2.5. For reference, a decent lawnmower today laughs at those numbers. Top speed was about 10 miles an hour. You could jog next to it, a determined golden retriever could keep up. But it worked. It actually, genuinely worked. Karl had done the impossible. He had built the first true automobile. And this is where our hero completely fumbles the bag. Because Karl Benz, mechanical genius, absolute wizard of engineering, was also a giant scaredy cat. He was terrified. He was convinced the public wasn't ready. He worried people would laugh. He worried it would break down in front of a crowd and humiliate him. He was a perfectionist, and to a perfectionist, good enough might as well be a personal insult. So instead of showing off the greatest invention of the century, he sat on it. No big public launch, no demonstrations to build hype. He'd do a few nervous little test drives, usually early in the morning or late at night so nobody would see if it went wrong. And even those didn't go great. Sometimes the thing sputtered and stalled, and Karl would just quietly push it back home, defeated, before anyone noticed. Bro invented the car and treated it like a shameful secret. Months went by. The car just sat there, gathering dust. The single most important machine in modern history, parked in a workshop, going absolutely nowhere because its creator was too anxious to let it out of the house. It's like inventing fire and being too shy to tell anyone it's warm. And Bertha? Bertha had had enough. She'd watched her husband pour his soul and her money into this machine. She knew it worked. She knew the only thing standing between this invention and the entire world was Karl's crippling stage fright. So one morning in August of 1888, she made a decision that would echo through history. She decided to steal the car. Okay, steal is dramatic, but she absolutely took it without permission. Here's the plan. Bertha wanted to visit her mother, who lived in Pforzheim, about 66 miles away. In today's terms, a casual afternoon drive. In 1888, an expedition into the great unknown. Nobody had ever driven a car that far. There were no roads built for it, no maps for it, no gas stations, no mechanics, no tow trucks, no nothing. And Bertha looked at all of that and went, "Yeah, I'll figure it out on the way." So before sunrise, so she wouldn't wake Karl, Bertha and her two teenage sons, Eugen, 15, and Richard, 14, quietly pushed the motor wagon out of the workshop. They pushed it by hand down the street, far enough away that the engine noise wouldn't wake Dad up, and then they fired it up and took off. She left Karl a note. A note. Imagine waking up, walking downstairs, and finding out your wife and kids have vanished, along with your life's work, the priceless, one-of-a-kind machine you've been too scared to even show the neighbors. That was Karl's morning. Peak chaos. And thus began the first long-distance road trip in the history of the automobile. Undertaken by a woman with zero formal engineering training, two teenagers, and a three-wheeled science experiment that had never gone more than a few miles from home. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. Everything could go wrong, and it did. Because this trip wasn't a smooth victory lap. It was a rolling disaster held together by pure improvisation. Bertha didn't just drive the car. She kept it alive through sheer force of will, and along the way she casually invented solutions that engineers still use today. Problem number 1. Fuel. This engine didn't run on gasoline like we know it. There were no gas stations because why would there be? Cars didn't exist yet. The motor wagon ran on a cleaning solvent called ligroin, a type of petroleum ether. And where do you buy cleaning solvent in 1888? A pharmacy. So partway through the journey, Bertha rolled into the town of Wiesloch, walked into the city pharmacy, and bought up their entire stock of ligroin to fuel her car. That pharmacy is now officially recognized as the first gas station in the world, not because anyone planned it, because a woman on a rogue road trip needed to top off the tank and the pharmacist happened to have the good stuff. History was made because Bertha needed a refill. Problem number 2. The fuel line kept clogging. The tiny pipe feeding fuel to the engine got blocked, and the car would just die. Now, a normal person stuck on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere with a broken alien machine would panic. Bertha reached up, pulled a long pin out of her hat, and used her hat pin to clean out the blocked fuel line. Read that again? She fixed a fundamental engine problem with a hair accessory. MacGyver wishes he was this smooth. No toolbox, no manual, just a hat pin and raw audacity. Problem number 3, and this one's my favorite, the ignition wire. At some point, an electrical wire lost its insulation and started shorting out. The car needs that spark to run. No spark, no explosions, no go. So Bertha, once again completely unbothered, took off one of her garters, yes, from her stockings, and used the fabric to insulate the exposed wire. So let's tally this up. The world's first road trip was powered by pharmacy cleaning fluid, and the car was repaired using a woman's hat pin and her underwear. This is the actual origin of the automobile, not a laboratory, not a team of scientists in white coats. A determined mom fixing a spaceship with whatever was in her outfit. And let's not forget, to everyone watching, this was completely insane. Picture you're a farmer in 1888. You have never seen anything move without a horse in your entire life. Not once. Then a loud, smoking, three-wheeled metal contraption comes rattling down the road with a woman and 2 kids on board and no animal anywhere in sight. People genuinely thought it was the devil. Horses panicked and bolted. Villagers ran out of their houses to stare like a UFO had just crash-landed in the town square. Bertha wasn't just driving. She was low-key traumatizing the entire German countryside, one confused village at a time. But wait, it gets better. Because we haven't even talked about the hills. Remember that engine? 2.5 horsepower on a good day? Turns out that's not a lot of oomph when you hit an incline. Every time the road went uphill, the little engine just couldn't do it. It wheezed, it struggled, it gave up. So Bertha and the boys had to get out and physically push the world's first car up the hills, on foot, sweating, shoving a metal tricycle up a slope like it was a stalled shopping cart. The greatest invention of the century, and its own inventor's family is out here manually pushing it up a hill because it can't climb. Absolutely humbling. When Bertha got home, she famously told Karl the engine needed another gear for the hills. And guess what? He added a lower gear. The woman didn't just test the car. She filed the world's first customer feedback report, and it was so good the design got permanently changed. And then there were the brakes. Oh, the brakes. The motor wagon used wooden brake blocks. Wooden. After grinding down hills and stopping over and over on a 66-mile trip, the wood started wearing away to nothing. So Bertha pulled into a village, found a shoemaker, and asked him to nail leather onto the brake blocks to make them grip better and last longer. Congratulations! Bertha Benz just invented brake linings. The concept of putting a wear-resistant material on your brakes? That's her. On the fly. Improvising at a cobbler shop. Modern brake pads exist because a woman on a road trip got tired of her wooden brakes turning into sawdust. Oh, and one more thing. The engine's cooling system worked by evaporating water, which means the car was constantly thirsty. It kept boiling off its coolant, so Bertha had to stop at inns, streams, and ditches along the way to refill the water and keep the engine from cooking itself. So on top of everything else, she's babysitting an overheating machine that drinks water like it's crossing a desert, fuel from a pharmacy, repairs from a hatpin, a garter, and a shoemaker. Pushing it up hills by hand, refilling the water every few miles. This wasn't a drive. This was a survival mission. And somehow, after a full day of this beautiful chaos, Bertha Benz rolled into Pforzheim. She actually made it. 66 miles. In a car everyone said couldn't do it. She sent Karl a telegram to let him know she'd survived and, oh yeah, proven his invention actually worked. And that's the twist that changes everything. Because Bertha's insane joyride wasn't just a family visit. It was the single greatest marketing stunt in history, and Karl didn't even plan it. See, for years Karl was too scared to prove the car could handle the real world. Bertha proved it in one day. She showed everyone that the automobile wasn't just a fragile little toy that stalled in the driveway. It could go the distance. It could climb hills, cross towns, refuel, and keep going. People saw this 3-wheeled machine roll through their villages, and their minds were blown. Word spread like wildfire. Bertha had turned Karl's shameful little secret into a public sensation. The trip generated exactly the publicity Karl was too terrified to chase. Sales picked up. Interest exploded. The improvements Bertha demanded, the extra gear, the better brakes, made the car genuinely better. She didn't just save the invention. She debugged it, marketed it, and relaunched it, all in a single afternoon, using a hatpin and her own underwear as tools. So here's where we land. The car, the machine that reshaped the entire planet, that built cities and highways and the whole modern world, almost died in a workshop because the genius who built it was too anxious to open the garage door. It took his wife, funded by her own money, committing what was basically grand theft auto, hauling 2 teenagers across the countryside and fixing the future with fashion accessories to force this invention into existence. Karl Benz gets the patent, the name, and the fancy logo on the hood. Fair enough, he built it. But the next time your car starts on the first try, cruises up a hill without complaint, and stops when you hit the brakes, don't thank the nervous perfectionist who hid it under a blanket. Thank the woman who stole it out of the shed, drove it into history, and casually invented half of it on the side of the road, all before her husband even woke up. The greatest invention of the 19th century wasn't saved by a genius. It was saved by his wife, straight up stealing it. And honestly, best decision anyone ever made?